And so for a period of time, it was clearly very, very difficult. Again, on my side of things, on the communications side, I did what I could. I sent half of my own. At one point, I was going to go there, but I think that there was a worry that it would be seen as a sort of British. The Americans are very sensitive to this idea of the Brits taking over and so forth. But I sent half of my office out there, and Tim Cross, whenever he needed people on the communication side, I eventually did a plan, which I've been trying to find, and we've not been able to find it, but I found John Saw's reply to it. But we did a plan for Bremer of communication structures based upon what we'd done previously, but adapted to it. And then John Buck from the Foreign Office, who'd been running the CIC, he went out there. We put together a pretty detailed communications plan. We filled the bits that we were meant to fill. Lots of the other bits just didn't, frankly, get filled. So, and in the end, one of the guys we sent ended up working in the new Iraqi Prime Minister's office. So I think the guys that we sent did a really, really good job in incredibly difficult circumstances. But on the bigger picture, I think that immediate lack of grit became an incredibly difficult security problem, which took a long time to resolve.
You've expressed today your support for the policy that was followed on Iraq with very great conviction. Do you consider now that it's been a success, and looking back on it, what lessons would you draw from it beyond the points that have already been made, for example, just now about the aftermath, and what regrets, if any, do you have?
Well, do I support it? Yes. I think that, as I said to you just before the break, I think that Britain, far from beating ourselves up about this, should be really proud of the role that we played in changing Iraq from what it was to what it is now becoming, and the potential impact that has on the region. I think, for example, that Libya and the moves that it made in relation to WMD, I don't know because I wasn't involved in those discussions, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was in part driven by them seeing these guys are serious now about this issue. I think that I saw the Prime Minister as closely and probably as often as anybody else, and I saw somebody of really deep conviction and integrity who was making, without doubt, the most difficult decision of his premiership, knowing there were going to be consequences, but also understanding there are what-if questions had he taken another decision. And again, I thought Chris Mair was really glib about the potential impact on the transatlantic relationship in relation to that.
Looking at the huge cost in loss of life over now 6.5 years, at the effects on the stability of the Middle Eastern region, at the development of international terrorism within Iraq, do you consider that overall the policy has succeeded?
I do, but not without reflecting often and realising the import of the caveats that you just put into that. I think in relation to the Middle East peace process, and bear in mind the roadmap is still the outline, and the Prime Minister did get the Americans to go down there. I don't think they can solely be blamed for the fact that there's been such little progress. I think in terms of security, yes, the death toll has been high. In terms of Iraqis, and obviously any loss of any British soldier's life is not just tragic, but it obviously weighs heavily on anybody who was involved in that process, most particularly, obviously, the Prime Minister. But I still think that when he had, and I saw it long before September the 11th, he was going on about this, about AQ Khan and about the potential link between WMD, terror groups, failed states, that this is the agenda that he saw that had to be addressed by the leaders of the democratic world. And he raised it in his very, very first meeting with George Bush. This is going to be the number one issue of your time. That was before September the 11th. And so I think that could things have been done differently? Almost certainly. Any decision, you can go back over it. But I think on the big picture, on the leadership that he showed, on the leadership that the British government showed on this issue. I was privileged to be there, and I'm very, very proud of the part that I was able to play.
Final question then. Murray.
Yes, I don't want to ask too much, but can I just one couple of questions and some more reflections from you. The first question, you described to us before the break about your shock at discovering that there weren't any, or there may not be any WMD. When did you first realise how difficult the aftermath might be? At what point did this strike you in the same way?
Early, 7 days, I think 7 days after the invasion, there was a meeting at which John Scarlett talked about some of the real difficulties within ORHA, the sense of the Americans really not knowing, not appearing to have the plan that we thought that they did. Really quite big, serious questions starting quite early.
And what was the response to those concerns? What did you think you could do?
I'm not sure I'm not sure as much that I could do.
That the government could do.
I think what from that point on, and I think that I mean I've not read all the papers beyond my time, but I know those who have will say, and obviously I kept in touch with the Prime Minister after I left Downing Street, that I think he was seized of all the problems, and yes, a lot of them were very difficult to resolve. I think at that point, David Manning talked about the Americans there was a period where they appeared to lose focus and not have that, staying on top of all the problems, and so there's no doubt there was a very difficult period.
And then to reflect a bit on what you described in answer to Sir Martin Gilbert, this intensity of debate that was taking place January, February, March, the polarisation in the country.
Yeah.
Did that make it difficult within government to have a re-evaluation of where you are? But because the stakes had been raised so high politically, that if you were standing back from it, you might even be seen to be edging, if you like, to the other side.
You see, it's true that the country was clearly very, very divided. The Parliamentary Labour Party very, very divided. I think actually within the cabinet there was a lot of genuine support for the position. Obviously, ultimately, Robin Cook resigned. Eventually, Claire Short resigned. But the support there was strong. I think that the questions that were constantly being put and the issues and concerns that were being raised, they weren't of the nature that was said, let's fundamentally reevaluate the position here. The position was, Saddam is a threat. He, in the eyes of the British Prime Minister and the British government, had become a greater threat, and he had to be confronted. He had to be forced to face up to his United Nations obligations. That remained, I think, the case the whole way through. Did it mean that, obviously, every aspect of policy was looked at different times in different ways? But that didn't really change throughout the whole thing. Did it make it more difficult, the fact that there was so much public opposition? Obviously.
And did it also mean that there was perhaps more of a focus on the war itself than on the aftermath, that it was, and on the UN process, the big decisions that you would have to face should regime change take place were not given the same attention as should we go to war and what about the UN?
Do you mean in that period? War?
Yeah.
My recollection is that all of those issues were getting very, very large public debate. But it's true that after the invasion, I mean, when the inquiry sent me the letter about the issues that we'd be going through, and again, this could be my memory not being that great, but my sense is that the aftermath, in a sense, didn't become as big a media and political issue at the time as, if I'm being frank, I thought that it probably could and should have been. And I think maybe if it had, the corrections that had to take place might have happened a bit more quickly.